The sun was just rising over the Montana mountains when Sarah was already up. The scent of damp earth mingled with the freshly brewed coffee she had prepared even before the rooster crowed. Her eyes, a deep brown like the waters of Pine River, observed the landscape through the window while her rough hands held the mug worn by time. Today's going to be a difficult day, she thought, seeing the dark clouds forming in the distance. The rain would arrive soon, and with it more work and worries. The farm where she lived wasn't large, but it demanded much from everyone. The cornfields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the animals needed constant care. Sarah had grown up there, amid the noise of tractors and the mooing of cattle. She knew every inch of that place, every tree, every fence. But in recent years, that piece of land that once represented freedom had transformed into her prison. "Sarah, where's the coffee?" Frank shouted from the kitchen, his harsh voice cutting through the morning silence like a sharp knife. Sarah flinched, spilling some coffee on her worn cotton skirt. She took a deep breath, placed the mug on the windowsill and headed to the kitchen. Frank was sitting at the table, his expression grim as always, his bloodshot eyes betraying last night's drinking. "Coming right up, Frank. Just finished brewing," she replied, keeping her voice low as if any louder tone might awaken the beast she knew existed within him. "That's all you're good for, isn't it? Brewing coffee." And barely that, he snapped, pounding his fist on the wooden table, making the cutlery clatter. Sarah didn't respond. Over the years, she had learned that silence was her best defense. Words, no matter how sweet or sincere, always transformed into ammunition in Frank's hands. And she already had too many scars, visible and invisible, to risk provoking another explosion. She served the coffee in silence, placed a piece of homemade cheese bread on the plate, and stepped back, maintaining a safe distance. Frank ate without saying anything, his eyes fixed on the food as if he didn't even register his wife's presence in the same room. "I'm going out. Got business in town," he finally announced, getting up from the table. "When I get back, I want the corral fence fixed and the corn sorted for selling tomorrow." "But Frank, I can't do all that alone. The fence needs—" The slap came before she could finish her sentence. Frank's heavy hand hit her face with force, making her stagger backward. The metallic taste of blood invaded her mouth. "I don't care if you can or can't. You'll do it, period. You think you eat for free? That you live here doing nothing, ungrateful?" Sarah remained motionless, her face burning, eyes fixed on the floor, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. She wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her cry. Not anymore. Frank grabbed the car keys, an old blue Chevy with more rust than paint, and slammed the door as he left. The sound of the engine roaring and the wheels spinning in the soft earth diminished until silence reigned once more in the small wooden house. Only then did Sarah allow herself to sit, her trembling legs giving way under the weight of another morning like so many others. Her hands, once firm in farm work, now shook uncontrollably. In the broken mirror hanging on the living room wall, she saw the reflection of what she had become, a shadow of the young woman full of dreams she once was. She wiped away her tears with her sleeve and decided to start working. Not because she blindly obeyed Frank's orders, but because she knew that if she didn't, the consequences would be worse when he returned, probably drunk and even more violent. She took the tools from the shed and headed to the stable. That's when she saw Oak, the old buffalo that Frank insisted on keeping on the farm, more out of stubbornness than necessity. The animal stared at her with his large, calm eyes, as if he perfectly understood her pain. "Hello, my old friend," Sarah whispered, approaching to caress the animal's head. "At least you never hurt me, do you?" Oak emitted a low sound, almost a sigh, nudging his muzzle against Sarah's hand. It was in these small moments that she found some comfort, some connection. The buffalo, with his silent and strong presence, was her only confidant in that isolated place. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The rain that Sarah had predicted finally fell, transforming the dry earth into mud, making work on the corral fence even more difficult. Her hands, already injured from hard work, bled from rusty nails and rough wood. Each hammer blow seemed to echo the question that wouldn't leave her mind. How did I end up here? Sarah remembered her first days with Frank. He seemed different. Then, or perhaps she was so desperate to leave her parents' house that she ignored the signs. The controlling manner, the possessive look, the way he insisted on isolating her from everyone. At the time, she interpreted it as protection, as love. Today, she recognized it as the first chains of a prison that gradually closed around her. A stronger gust of wind brought more intense rain. Sarah decided to seek shelter in the stable. Oak was there as always, his constant presence a source of comfort amid the chaos. "Won't be able to finish today, my friend," she said, sitting on a hay bale near the buffalo. "He's going to be furious." The thought made her stomach churn. Sarah knew Frank's temper all too well. The more he drank, the more violent he became. And in recent months, he drank almost every day. While waiting for the rain to decrease, Sarah began organizing the small stable space. Not because she needed to, but because the activity kept her mind occupied, away from the dark thoughts that constantly haunted her. That's when she noticed something strange. One of the floorboards was loose, slightly raised. Driven by curiosity, she approached and carefully pulled up the wood. Underneath was a small space, like an improvised hiding place. Sarah reached in and felt something, an envelope old and yellowed by time. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter and some money. With her heart racing, she began to read. "I'm writing for someone who needs to know there's a way out. I know what you're going through. I too was Frank's prisoner, but I managed to escape. You can too if you want. Use this money. The path by the river is the only one he doesn't know. Don't be afraid. If you find this, it's your time to go, Claire." Sarah had to read it 3 times to understand what it meant. Claire. Who was Claire? Frank had never mentioned that name, never talked about previous relationships. But the letter, it was there, concrete, tangible, and the words resonated with a truth that Sarah couldn't deny. So I'm not the first, she thought, a mixture of relief and horror taking over her being. Relief in knowing she wasn't crazy, that the hell she lived was real and recognized by someone else. Horror in thinking about how many women before her had endured the same torment at Frank's hands. The sound of a car approaching tore her from her thoughts. Sarah quickly put the letter and money back in the hiding place, replaced the board and left the stable, her heart beating so hard it seemed it would burst from her chest. Frank got out of the car, staggering, visibly drunk. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing herself for what would come next. "Is the fence done?" he asked, his voice slurred by alcohol. "I couldn't finish because of the rain, Frank. Tomorrow morning She couldn't finish. Frank lunged at her, grabbing her hair forcefully, dragging her into the house. "Useless! That's what you are. A useless woman who's good for nothing." Sarah didn't scream, didn't beg, remained silent as she always did. Silence was her only form of resistance, the only way to maintain a fragment of dignity while enduring the blows and insults. When it finally ended, Frank was snoring on the couch, the empty whiskey bottle by his side. Sarah, with new marks on, her body and soul, dragged herself to the bathroom. In the stained mirror, she saw the reflection of a face she no longer recognized, the split lip, the swollen eye. But it was the empty look that frightened her most. "For how long?" she asked. The woman in the mirror. "How long will I endure this?" Claire's letter, hidden beneath the stable's floorboards, now seemed like a call, a beacon in the darkness that was her life. There was a way out. Someone had succeeded. Why couldn't she? She washed her face with cold water, feeling the sting of recent wounds. She decided to return to the stable, to seek comfort in Oak's presence and to think. She needed a plan. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a clean, starry night. The path to the stable was muddy, but Sarah barely noticed the dirt accumulating. On her bare feet, her mind was focused on one thing, survival. Oak greeted her with a soft moo, as if he sensed her pain and wanted to comfort her. Sarah hugged the buffalo's neck, allowing herself for the first time in a long time to cry openly. "We need to get out of here, my friend," she whispered between sobs. "I can't live like this anymore. I won't survive if I stay here." The buffalo, in his silent wisdom, seemed to understand. Sarah took out the letter from the hiding place again and reread it by the dim light of an old lantern. Claire's message was clear. There was an escape route, a possibility of freedom. The following morning brought with it a clear sky and birdsong, cruelly contrasting with the reality inside the small wooden house. Sarah woke before dawn, as she always did, her body aching from the previous night's abuse. She moved silently through the house, avoiding waking Frank, who was snoring heavily in the bedroom. While preparing coffee, her mind worked incessantly, analyzing Claire's letter, calculating possibilities, imagining escape routes. The idea of escaping, which before seemed an impossible dream, now took shape and substance in her. Thoughts? The path by the river is the only one he doesn't know. The phrase echoed in her mind. Sarah knew Pine River well, which cut through the property a few miles from the house. Frank rarely went there, preferring to stay near the farm's main house or go to town to drink. Would it really be a viable route? The noise of an unfamiliar car interrupted her thoughts. Who could it be, so early and so far from town? Sarah peeked through the window and saw an official vehicle parking in the yard. A woman of about 40, formally dressed in a blouse and jeans, got out of the car carrying a folder. Sarah's heart raced. Visitors were rare at that isolated farm, and Frank didn't like strangers on his property. He considered any visitor a threat to his domain, to the control he exercised over Sarah and everything around him. Before she could decide what to do, the woman knocked on the door. Sarah quickly glanced at the bedroom, making sure Frank was still asleep, and opened the door just enough to see the visitor's face. "Good morning. My name is Mary Simmons. I'm a social worker from the Pineville Town Hall," the woman introduced herself with a gentle smile. "We're doing a survey for the food basket distribution program in the region. May I talk with you for a bit?" Sarah hesitated. She had never received visits from social workers before. In fact, the farm was so isolated that she rarely saw different faces besides Frank's and some corn and milk buyers who appeared sporadically. "My husband is sleeping," Sarah whispered, casting a nervous glance into the house. "He doesn't like visitors." Mary Simmons nodded understandingly, as if she comprehended more than Sarah had said in words. "We can talk out here quickly. I don't want to disturb." Reluctantly, Sarah stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The swollen eye and split lip didn't go unnoticed by the social worker, who maintained her professional demeanor, although her eyes revealed concern. "We're registering families in vulnerable situations for the food aid program," Mary explained, opening her folder and taking out some forms. "Would you and your husband be interested in participating?" Sarah didn't know what to answer. Frank would certainly reject any type of charity, as he called it, but the idea of receiving a food basket could alleviate some financial pressure, perhaps even reduce the frequency with which he drank, if money wasn't so scarce. "I don't know. I have to ask him." Mary filled out some fields on the form, asking simple questions about family composition, income, and living conditions. Sarah answered mechanically, always alert to any noise coming from inside the house. "And do you work only here on the farm?" asked Mary, her tone casual but her eyes attentive. "Yes, I take care of the crops, the animals, the house." Sarah stopped, realizing she was saying more than she should. "I understand. And do you have contact with other people? Family, friends? In town?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. How long had it been since she'd spoken to someone other than Frank? Years, perhaps. He had systematically cut all her connections, isolating her on that farm like an object of his property. "No, I don't have contact with anyone anymore," she admitted, her voice so low it could barely be heard. Mary nodded again, and something in her look made Sarah think she perfectly understood what was happening on that farm. The social worker accidentally dropped a card which slid near Sarah's feet. "Oops." "Sorry," said Mary, bending down to pick up the card, but not before Sarah read what was written on it. New Dawn Shelter, a safe place to start over, and an address in Pineville. As she stood up, Mary looked directly into Sarah's eyes and said, in a low voice, almost a whisper, "If you ever need help, this is the place. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We're never alone." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. How did that woman know? Was the hell she lived in so obvious? The sound of the door opening interrupted the moment. Frank appeared, still sleepy, but his face soon contorted into an expression of anger when he saw the visitor. "Who are you? What are you doing on my property?" he demanded, his voice laden with threat. Mary maintained her composure, introducing herself professionally and explaining the reason for her visit. Frank listened with visible distrust, his eyes going from Mary to Sarah, as if blaming her for the stranger's presence. "We don't need any charity," he declared categorically. "We have everything we need here." "Of course, sir. We're just doing a survey. There's no obligation," Mary replied calmly. "I'll leave my card in case you change your mind." She extended an official town hall card to Frank, who took it with disdain. Sarah noticed it was different from the one she had seen before, the one for the shelter. "Sarah, come inside. We have work to do," Frank ordered, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Sarah obeyed, but not without exchanging one last look with Mary Simmons. There was something in that look, a silent promise of help, a mutual recognition that Sarah wasn't alone in her suffering. While Frank escorted Mary to her car, practically expelling her from the property, Sarah remained at the window watching. The social worker got into the vehicle and left, but not without looking back at the house one last time, as if she knew Sarah was watching her. When Frank returned, his mood was worse than ever. "Who does that woman think she is coming here? Sticking her nose into our business," he ranted, crumpling the town hall card and throwing it in the trash. "And you? Why did you let her in?" "I didn't let her in, Frank. She knocked on the door and I answered," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear she felt growing inside her. "Answered why? Since when do you decide who comes in and who doesn't in my house?" Frank was approaching dangerously, his fists clenched, his heavy breathing betraying the anger boiling inside him. Sarah instinctively backed away, seeking distance, protection. "I thought it might be important." Her voice failed when she saw the gleam in his eyes, that gleam she knew so well and that always preceded the worst. "Important? You mean my opinion isn't important? That I'm not important? Is that it?" Each word was loaded with venom. Each step toward her increased the terror Sarah felt. She knew what would come next, knew that ritual of humiliation and pain as well as she knew her own face in the mirror. The explosion was inevitable. Sarah felt the impact, even before registering the movement of Frank's hand. Her body was already conditioned to receive the violence, to absorb the pain, to survive. "Never open the door to anyone again." "Understood, no one," he shouted as the blows fell. "That social worker must be wanting to stick her nose where it doesn't belong. And you, idiot, giving her a chance." Sarah didn't defend herself physically. She knew from experience that any attempt at defense only made the situation worse. Instead, she curled up, protecting her face and head with her arms, waiting for the storm to pass. When it finally ceased, Frank left, slamming the door, announcing he was going to town to buy cattle feed. Sarah remained on the kitchen floor, feeling every inch of her body throb with pain. The tears, which she had long learned to contain, now flowed freely down her bruised face. Minutes passed before she could gather the strength to get up. She staggered to the bathroom and, avoiding looking at her own reflection, washed her face with cold water. The metallic taste of blood persisted in her mouth, a constant reminder of her reality. With painful steps, Sarah headed to the stable, her refuge, the only place where she felt safe. Oak greeted her with a soft moo as if he perceived her pain and wanted to comfort her. "He's going to kill me one of these days, Oak," Sarah whispered, caressing the buffalo's muzzle. "And I know it's not a question of if, but when." The animal stared at her with his large, expressive eyes, conveying more understanding than any human had ever shown her. Without being able to help it, Sarah returned to the loose floorboard, retrieving Claire's letter. She reread each word, absorbing the message of hope it contained. "The path by the river is the only one he doesn't know." The phrase echoed in her mind like a mantra, a possibility of salvation. Mary Simmons' visit had been a sign. Sarah now understood. It wasn't a coincidence. The social worker somehow knew what was happening on that farm. The New Dawn shelter card was an extended hand, an offer of help for those with the courage to accept it. But what if I fail, thought Sarah, fear threatening to paralyze her nascent resolution. Frank would find her for sure, and then what would be left of her? As if answering her unspoken question, Oak gently pushed her hand with his muzzle, in an almost encouraging gesture. Sarah looked at the buffalo, her only friend, her only source of comfort in that hell. "You're coming with me," she decided. Suddenly, "I won't leave you here with him." The idea seemed absurd, escaping with a buffalo, but Sarah couldn't bear the thought of abandoning Oak to Frank's mercy, especially after he discovered her escape. Frank would pour all his rage onto the animal, and that was something Sarah couldn't allow. With a clarity she hadn't felt in years, Sarah began to elaborate a plan. The path by the river, as suggested by Claire. The address of the New Dawn shelter that Mary Simmons had discreetly shared. The money hidden under the floorboard. Everything seemed to align like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their places. But when? That was the crucial question. It would have to be when Frank was away, obviously, and it needed to be soon, before another explosion of violence ended her life. As if the universe was answering her inquiry, thunder rumbled in the distance. Sarah looked through the small stable window and saw black clouds forming on the horizon. A storm was approaching. Frank hated driving in heavy rain, especially on the dirt road that connected the farm to town. If the storm arrived while he was still in town, he would probably stay there drinking in some bar until the rain passed, or maybe he wouldn't even return, sleeping at some friend's house or even in the car itself, as he had done several times. "Tonight," Sarah whispered to Oak, the decision crystallized in her mind. "We'll escape tonight during the storm." With a determination she hadn't felt for a long time, Sarah returned to the house and began to prepare everything for her escape. She gathered Claire's money and the little she had managed to save over the years, hiding a few bills here and there when Frank was too drunk to notice. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. She collected some essential documents, her birth certificate, her personal documents, the deed to the land that had belonged to her parents and that Frank had put in her name to avoid problems with creditors. Everything was carefully wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from the rain and hidden in a small cloth sack. As she worked, the rain began to fall, first in sparse drops, then in a dense curtain that transformed day into premature night. The phone rang, startling Sarah. It was Frank, his slurred voice indicating he had already started drinking. "The road's a mess with this rain," he said. "I'll stay in town until it passes. Don't do anything stupid there, you hear?" "Yes, Frank," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. This was her chance, her moment. As soon as she hung up, Sarah finished her preparations with renewed urgency. She took some clothes, a little food, and the address of the New Dawn shelter. Everything she needed to start over. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The storm increased in intensity, transforming the sky into a whirlwind of grey clouds. Lightning cut across the horizon, followed by deafening thunder that made the small wooden house tremble. For anyone else, it would be a night to take shelter. For Sarah, it was the perfect cloak for her escape. She waited until night had completely fallen, watching the wall clock patiently mark each minute, each hour. At 9, she dressed in several layers of clothing to face the rain. Over them, she put on an old waterproof cape she used to work in the fields during lighter rains. She looked one last time at the interior of the house that had been her prison for so many years. She wouldn't miss that place, those walls that had witnessed so much suffering in silence. Still, a strange sense of unreality enveloped her. Was she really doing this? Was she really leaving everything behind? "There's nothing to leave behind," she whispered to herself, closing the door without looking back. The path to the stable was a mud pit, the rain transforming the earth into a treacherous swamp. Sarah slipped several times but kept moving, driven by fear and determination. Oak seemed restless when she entered, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Sarah approached, caressing his wet neck from the moisture that penetrated through the cracks of the old stable. "It's time, friend," she murmured, tying a rope around the buffalo's neck. It wasn't a proper halter, but it would have to do. "We're getting out of here together." Sarah checked once more the small bag she carried under her cape. Documents, money, the new Dawn Shelter address, and a minimal change of clothes. It was all she had, all she could take. Slowly she guided Oak out of the stable. The buffalo hesitated initially, unaccustomed to going out at night, especially during such a heavy storm. But the trust he had in Sarah prevailed, and soon they were, both under the torrential rain. "We'll go by the river," said Sarah, almost shouting to be heard above the sound of the storm. Claire said it's the only path he doesn't know. Pine River was approximately a mile from the house, through a trail in the woods that Sarah knew well. During the day, it was a relatively easy path to travel. At night, under intense rain, it transformed into a formidable challenge. The mud made each step an effort. The darkness hid roots and stones that could easily cause a dangerous fall. Sarah held Oak's rope tightly, fearing to lose him in the darkness. The buffalo in turn advanced, with surprising determination, as if he understood the importance of that journey. "That's it, Oak, just a little more," Sarah encouraged both the animal and herself. A particularly strong lightning illuminated the sky, allowing Sarah to briefly see the path ahead. They were almost reaching the river. The sound of running water could already be heard, competing with the roar of the storm. When they finally reached the bank, Sarah stopped to catch her breath. The river, normally calm, was turbulent from the rain, its muddy waters running forcefully between the banks. According to Claire's letter, the path by the river was the only one Frank didn't know. But what did that mean exactly? Follow the bank? Cross to the other side? The letter didn't specify, and Sarah now faced a crucial decision. She looked to both sides, trying to orient herself in the darkness. Downstream, the river led toward other farms, some of which belonged to Frank's friends. It wasn't a safe option. Upstream, the river led to a more remote area, with fewer properties, eventually reaching the outskirts of Pineville. "We'll go upstream," Sarah decided, gently pulling Oak's rope. Walking along the bank was even more difficult than on the trail. The terrain was steep in some points, slippery and unstable in others. Sarah fell several times, getting up with difficulty, her knees and hands scraped by exposed stones and roots. Oak, despite his size and weight, showed surprising agility, adapting to the difficult terrain with a determination that Sarah envied. In some narrower stretches, the buffalo had to partially enter the water to continue advancing. After what seemed like an eternity, but probably wasn't more than a few hours, Sarah spotted a distant light on the opposite bank of the river. She stopped, her heart racing with fear and exhaustion. Could it be someone looking for her? Had Frank discovered her escape and alerted the neighbors? She hid behind a tree, pulling Oak with her, and watched carefully. The light didn't move like a flashlight carried by someone. It seemed more stationary, like that of a house or a post. While trying to decide what to do, the rain finally began to decrease, allowing a slightly better visibility. It was then that Sarah noticed something familiar on the opposite bank, a small red sign, almost invisible in the darkness, but which the distant light occasionally illuminated when lightning cut across the sky. Her heart almost stopped when she recognized the symbol on the sign, the same one that was on the card that Mary Simmons had accidentally dropped. The New Dawn Shelter. "It can't be a coincidence," Sarah murmured, a wave of renewed hope coursing through her tired body. She knew, Mary knew I would find Claire's letter, that I would follow the river. With renewed energy, Sarah looked for a spot where she could cross the river with Oak. Normally, Pine River was relatively shallow in certain stretches, allowing crossing on foot. But with the rains, the water level had risen considerably and the current was strong. She continued upstream, Oak faithfully following behind her, until she found a stretch where the river widened and consequently became less deep. Even so, the water would reach her chest at the deepest point. Sarah faced the turbulent waters before her, hesitation and determination vying for space in her exhausted mind. The crossing would be dangerous, especially with the river swollen by rain, but the alternative, returning to the farm, to Frank, was unthinkable. "Come on, Oak," she whispered, more to encourage herself than the buffalo. "We need to cross." She tested the strength of the current with a branch, watching how the water easily tore it from her hand. The danger was real, but the light on the other bank, the promise of safety it represented, was an impossible call to ignore. Carefully, Sarah firmly tied the rope around Oak's neck, securing the other end around her own waist. It was risky. If the buffalo lost balance, it could drag her along. But she also knew that the animal's strength and survival instinct could be her salvation. "I trust you, friend," she said, caressing the buffalo's wet muzzle, receiving a soft moo in response. Before entering the water, Sarah protected her small bag of documents and money, placing it inside 2 plastic bags and tying it securely under her clothes. Then, taking a deep breath, she took her first step into the river. The water was freezing, a surprise for a warm summer night in Montana. Sarah felt her muscles protest against the sudden cold, but forced herself to continue advancing. With each step, the current grew stronger, the water deeper. Oak followed cautiously, his hooves firmly finding support on the river's rocky bed. Sarah silently thanked the buffalo's natural ability with water. Those animals were born practically amphibious, adapted to flooded terrain and rivers. When they reached the middle of the river, the water was already at Sarah's chest. The current pulled strongly, threatening to knock her down at any moment. She clung to the rope that connected her to Oak, using it as an anchor against the force of the water. "Easy, Oak, easy," she repeated, both to the animal and to herself, as they fought against the current. It was then that Sarah felt the river bottom disappear beneath her feet. A hole, an unexpected depression in the riverbed. Her body suddenly sank, the water covering her head, filling her lungs. Panic dominated her for an instant. Would she drown so close to freedom? In that moment of despair, she felt a firm pull on the rope around her waist. Oak, sensing her danger, advanced with determination, dragging her to shallower waters. Sarah emerged coughing, spitting water, but alive. "Thank you," she babbled between coughs, clinging to the buffalo's wet fur. The rest of the crossing was a test of endurance and will. Each step was a battle against exhaustion, against the cold that infiltrated her bones, against the fear that threatened to paralyze her. When her feet finally touched the opposite bank, Sarah almost couldn't believe it. She fell to her knees in the mud, shaking uncontrollably, tears of relief mixing with the rain on her face. "We did it, Oak. We made it." The buffalo shook himself beside her, spreading water everywhere. Sarah couldn't help a small smile, her first genuine smile in a long time. But there was no time for prolonged rest. Frank could return to the farm at any moment and discover her escape. They needed to continue, to reach the light she had seen, the possible salvation it represented. With trembling legs, Sarah got up and began walking toward the light, guiding Oak through the unfamiliar terrain. The rain had diminished to a light drizzle, but the darkness still made the walk challenging. As they approached, the light revealed itself as a simple house, made of wood, but well-maintained, with a porch illuminated by a single lamp. At the entrance, a small and discreet sign confirmed her hopes: New Dawn Shelter. Sarah stopped a few yards away, her heart racing. What if it was a trap? What if Frank had connections even here? Fear, a constant companion for so many years, threatened to make her retreat. But before she could decide what to do, the door of the house opened. A middle-aged woman, with grey hair and a serene expression, stepped onto the porch. She held a flashlight, which she pointed in the direction of Sarah and Oak. "You finally arrived," said the woman, her voice calm, almost as if she had been waiting for Sarah for a long time. "I'm Claire." Sarah felt her legs weaken. Claire, the author of the letter, the woman who had escaped from Frank before her. She was there, real, alive, extending her hand across the abyss of despair that had been her life. How did you know I would come?" asked Sarah, her voice trembling with emotion and exhaustion. "Mary Simmons warned me you might appear tonight," Claire replied, descending the porch steps and approaching with the flashlight. "She has a sixth sense for women in danger. And the storm, well, I also escaped during a storm. It seems to be the moment when we finally find courage." When the flashlight's light fully illuminated Sarah, Claire couldn't contain an exclamation of surprise and concern. "My God, look at you!" Her eyes scanned the evident bruises on Sarah's face, the soaked clothes, the obvious state of exhaustion. Then she noticed Oak. "And you brought the buffalo." "I couldn't leave him," Sarah explained simply, fatigue making it difficult to elaborate. Further, Claire nodded as if she perfectly understood. "We have a small stable behind the house. He'll be safe there. Come, you need to dry off and rest. We have a lot to talk about, but that can wait until tomorrow." Sarah hesitated only for a moment before following Claire. Something about the woman's presence inspired trust, a feeling almost forgotten after years living with Frank. The interior of the New Dawn shelter was simple but welcoming. Walls painted in soft tones, modest but comfortable furniture, and an atmosphere of tranquility that Sarah hadn't experienced in years. A fireplace lit in the corner of the main room spread warmth and golden light throughout the environment. "Let's take care of your friend first," said Claire, guiding Sarah and Oak to the back of the property. The small stable mentioned by Claire was, in fact, a well-built structure, clean and dry, with individual stalls and a generous stock of fresh. Hi! To Sarah's surprise, there were other animals there, 2 cows, some goats, and an elderly horse that observed the newcomers with curiosity. "They all came with their owners," Claire explained, noticing Sarah's questioning look. "Many women can't leave their animals behind. They're like family." Sarah nodded, moved to realize she wasn't the only one to feel such a connection with an animal, to the point of risking her escape for it. After settling Oak with fresh water and abundant hay, Claire led Sarah back to the house. On the way, she briefly explained, "The shelter officially functions as a social project supporting rural women, offering craft courses, legal assistance for land documentation, that sort of thing. It's our legal facade. Beneath that, we're a refuge for women in situations of violence, especially those isolated in rural areas where help rarely reaches." Upon entering, Sarah realized there were other women in the house. 3 of them were sitting at the kitchen table talking in low voices. When they saw Sarah, they all fell silent momentarily, assessing the newcomer with looks that mixed understanding and solidarity. "This is Sarah," Claire introduced. "She arrived just now, crossed the river during the storm." The women didn't ask anything more, didn't demand explanations. Instead, one of them immediately stood up. "I'll prepare a hot bath for you," she offered with a gentle smile. "I'm Deborah." Another woman, younger, with a visible scar on her chin, brought a clean towel and dry clothes. "I'm Lucy. These should fit you. They're nothing special, but they're clean and dry." The third woman, older than the others, with completely white hair, approached with a steaming mug. "Lemon balm tea with honey. Calms the nerves and warms the body. I'm Miss Eleanor." Sarah accepted everything in silence, overwhelmed by the kindness, by the evident care of these strangers who, somehow, seemed to understand her better than anyone she had ever known. After a hot bath, the first truly relaxing bath in years without the constant fear of Frank appearing shouting that she was taking too long, Sarah returned to the kitchen, wearing the borrowed clothes. Her aching body still protested against the efforts of the escape, but the sensation of cleanliness and the dry clothes brought a comfort she barely remembered was possible. The women were sitting around the table, including Claire now, talking calmly while drinking tea. Their seat was vacant, clearly reserved for Sarah. "Sit down, dear," Miss Eleanor invited. "Eat something. The journey must have been exhausting." On the table were homemade bread, fresh cheese, fruits, and more tea. Sarah sat hesitantly, still not entirely comfortable with the idea of being safe, of being able to relax. "You don't need to say anything today," Claire assured, noticing her discomfort. "I just rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about the next steps." "Next steps?" asked Sarah, finally finding her voice. "Yes. You'll need to decide what you want to do from here on. Some women stay with us for a while and then move to other towns, starting new lives. Others prefer to fight for their properties, especially when children are involved. Each situation is unique." "And him?" Sarah didn't need to specify who him was. All the women at the table understood. "Frank doesn't know about this place," Claire replied firmly. "And even if he discovered it, we have protection. The sheriff of Pineville is our ally, as are several ranchers in the region. This property is in the name of an international NGO with impeccable documentation. Legally, he can't do anything against us. Sarah wanted to believe, but years of fear and conditioning made it difficult to accept that she could really be safe. Sensing her doubt, Lucy extended her hand across the table, lightly touching Sarah's. I didn't believe it either when I arrived. I spent the first week expecting my ex-husband to appear at any moment to drag me back, but that was 8 months ago. Today I'm a teacher at the Pineville Town School. I have my own apartment, and last week I finally signed the divorce papers. Deborah, the woman who had prepared the bath, added, 3 years for me. Today I manage the Crafts Women's Cooperative. We created here. We export to New York and even abroad. Who would have thought, right? A woman like me who could barely sign her own name when I arrived. Miss Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with wisdom and strength. And me. I've been here for 12 years. I was the first guest after Claire herself. Today I'm the grandmother of all who arrive. And believe me, my child, I've seen many women sitting exactly where you are, with that same lost look, thinking there's no future. But there is. There always is. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, tears that weren't of fear or pain, but of relief, of hope, an almost forgotten emotion. Sarah's first night at the New Dawn shelter was restless, despite the comfort of the clean bed and the feeling of safety that the walls of that place provided. Nightmares woke her several times, dreams where Frank found her, where he dragged her back to the farm, where Oak suffered under his fury. When the sun finally rose, illuminating the small room with a golden light, Sarah felt exhausted, but strangely renewed. She had survived, she had escaped, and for the first time in years, she had a whole day ahead without the terror of Frank's presence. After a simple but nutritious breakfast, shared with the other residents of the house, Claire invited Sarah for a private conversation. They walked through the property, her grounds, a privileged piece of land with a view of Pine River, the same river that Sarah had crossed the night before. "How do you feel today?" asked Claire, her tone gentle but direct. "I don't know," Sarah replied honestly. "It's as if I'm in a dream, as if at any moment I could wake up and be back there." Claire nodded understandingly. "That feeling is normal. I had it too. It took months to believe I was really free." "May I ask, how was it with you?" Sarah hesitated, but the curiosity about the woman who had left the letter, who had created that refuge, was too great to ignore. Claire took a deep breath, her gaze losing itself in the river landscape for a moment. "Frank and I got married when I was only 17. He was different in the beginning, or maybe I was just too naive to notice the signs." She paused, gathering painful memories. "The first blows came after 2 years of marriage. The humiliations started earlier, but I didn't recognize them as abuse. I thought it was normal for a husband to control his wife, that's how marriages worked." Sarah nodded. She perfectly understood that confusion, that gradual normalization of abusive behavior. "I endured it for 8 years, Claire continued. 8 long years in which I lost pieces of myself day by day, until one night he beat me so violently that I thought I wouldn't survive. That same night, I took what little I had and fled during a storm, just like you." "And how did you get here? How did you create all this?" Sarah gestured, encompassing the property. A soft smile appeared on Claire's face. "This land belonged to my grandmother, a small piece but legally registered in her name. When she passed away, I inherited the property, but Frank never knew. It was my secret, my escape plan. After I escaped, I came here. It was abandoned, practically in ruins, but it was mine. I started alone, rebuilding little by little." Claire pointed to a small cabin at the edge of the property. "That was my first shelter here. It didn't even have an indoor bathroom at the time, but I preferred living like that 1,000 times free than in that golden prison that was Frank's farm." "And how did it transform into a shelter for other women?" "A year after my escape, a woman appeared at my door. She was the wife of a neighboring rancher, beaten, desperate, with nowhere to go. I couldn't send her away. She stayed, helped me expand the cabin. Then came another, and another. Claire made a gesture encompassing the property. With time, we realized we needed a more organized structure, more protection. That's when I met Mary Simmons, who helped us establish the legal facade as a social project. Today we have partnerships with NGOs, volunteer lawyers, doctors. Sarah listened in admiration. From despair and pain had been born something so beautiful, so necessary. "And the letter?" she asked. "How did you know I would find it?" Claire smiled enigmatically. "I didn't know. I hid several letters like that in different locations on the farm when I fled. In places where I used to hide when Frank became furious, spaces that another woman in a similar situation might seek as refuge." "And the money?" "Savings I made over the years, small amounts that Frank never noticed missing. I hid them with the letters, hoping they could help someone do what I did." Sarah felt tears in her eyes again. Claire's act of thinking about other women who would come after her, of leaving an escape route, touched her deeply. "And now? What happens to me?" she finally asked. "That depends on you, Sarah." Claire turned to face her directly. "Hear you. Have choices. You can stay at the shelter for as long as you need. We have professional training programs, psychological support, legal assistance. You can build a new life as Lucy and Deborah did, or if you wish, you can fight for the farm that is legally yours too." The farm? Sarah had never considered this possibility. The idea of returning, of confronting Frank, seemed unthinkable. "The property is in your name too, isn't it? You mentioned that yesterday. You were smart enough to bring the documents. With the help of our lawyers, you could claim your part. Frank has a history of violence that we can prove. I don't know if I have the courage for that. I don't need to decide now." Claire gently squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "You just arrived. Give yourself time to rest, to heal. The decisions will come when you're ready." At that moment, they heard a familiar moo. Oak had escaped from the stable and was walking calmly through the pasture, exploring his new environment. Sarah couldn't contain a smile seeing the buffalo so at ease, so free. "I think your friend has already decided to stay," commented Claire, laughing softly. "He seems to like it here." "He deserves this freedom," Sarah said, watching Oak. "He was my only friend during all those years, my only comfort." Animals have a sensitivity that many humans have lost. They know who deserves trust and who doesn't. Sarah nodded, thoughtful. Then, as if making a sudden decision, she turned to Claire. "I want to learn. Everything you can teach me. I want to know how to help other women as you helped me." Claire's face lit up with a genuine smile. "That's exactly the spirit that keeps this place alive, Sarah. Each woman who passed through here left a bit of herself, contributed in some way to strengthen our network. Some left and built new lives far from here. Others remained and became part of New Dawn." At that moment, a pickup truck approached on the dirt road leading to the house. Sarah immediately tensed, the old fear resurfacing like a reflex. "It's all right," Claire reassured. "It's just Mary Simmons." The social worker got out of the vehicle, her face opening into a broad smile when she saw Sarah. "You made it!" she exclaimed, approaching for a hug that Sarah surprisingly didn't hesitate to return. "When the storm started yesterday, I hoped you would take the opportunity." "Thank you for the card," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "It was like finding a light at the end of the tunnel." "It's my job to find women like you and show that there's a way out," Mary replied simply. "But you were the one who had the courage to take the most difficult step." The three women walked back to the house together, where other residents were already preparing lunch. Sarah observed the scene with a growing sense of belonging. These women, with stories so similar to hers, had formed a family of choice, a circle of protection and mutual support. Oak grazed peacefully in the background, free and safe. Pine River, which the night before had been a frightening obstacle, now sparkled under the sun, like a symbol of the crossing that Sarah had made. Not just physical, but emotional.